everyone, welcome to our webinar today. This webinar is looking at visualizing buildings and infrastructure design with Twinmotion. Today we're joined by Jeff Older, application specialist here at Symmetry. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Jeff, and let me go through my little slides here then and introduce myself and move forward. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. So we'll have a look at visualization and infrastructure, but mainly looking at Twinmotion, of course. So if I jump over to myself, yeah, as we said, my name's Jeff Older. I'm application specialist here at Symmetry. A brief description about my history. I've worked with CAD and design and 3D visualization for the best part of 30 years now, developing training content for not only just the AEC, but manufacturing, broadcast, and the video games industry. So this is where my work is. So what I want to have a look at today is really jumping straight in to look at some of the aspects of Twinmotion. So what we'll do, we'll start looking at understanding Revit, how that's going to work into Twinmotion. So let me just close that out of the way for the moment and then come straight into my Twinmotion here. Here I have Twinmotion set up. But prior to that, I'm just going to jump over to my little Revit here. Now, one of the areas I wanted to look at for us today, it's cropped up a couple of times in my work, is how do we deal with getting Revit? How does it come into Twinmotion? What are the benefits of this in Twinmotion and so on? So one of the areas I wanted to look at here is that I've got a little example here, to be honest, of a project that I was doing. It's actually with my own daughter's house. They've just bought a property, and in this property here, there is going to be the HS2 is going to be going quite close to them here. So I wanted to look at the opportunity of using this geometry to show through Twinmotion how that change will happen from the existing field in the background through to having the train and rail line going past, this type of thing. So looking at my relatively straightforward little Revit model here, I've got two things I wanted to show. One, when we import into Twinmotion, we can import through our Datasmith here in our Revit. So with Datasmith, I can export to a Datasmith file here. Downloading the Datasmith exporter, very simple. In your downloads, either go to the Twinmotion download site, or indeed if you're working with Revit in your AutoCAD Autodesk application, you can then download it from there. So what I wanted to do is look at two things of importing this into Twinmotion. This particular model here, in preparation for it going into Twinmotion, as you can see, I have a very simple surface here, which is my existing field, so to speak, and then I've got some geometry here that's going to indicate the change or the regrade of the soil around the ground around. And secondly, here on this particular model, because I've created this model in Revit here, I've got a building here which is a Revit model. But also what I've done here is I've got some roof tiles here that I created in Revit. Now, the reason why I'm just jumping over to a second view in Revit of just my tiles here is because I will export this particular aspect out separately, because in my house here, I can import all this into my Twinmotion, and I can then bring in the tiles as a separate object. Let me show you what I mean here. So jumping straight over to my Twinmotion here, if I look at new scene, for example, I create new scene here. So this is Twinmotion. This is version 2023.1.1. So I'm using the most recent version of Twinmotion here. And Twinmotion, if anybody's been using Twinmotion, is actually developed and has the backing, of course, of Unreal Engine, which is essentially owned by Epic Games. So we've got a really a nice backup here on the project of Twinmotion. First things first, I'm clicking on an import here. So if I click on an import, I want to bring in that Datasmiths file. So if I click on my import here, you'll see that we've got a few options here for import. Now I'm bringing in the geometry here, but I could be working with a direct link, and that would be basically back and forward from Twinmotion to my Revit. But at this instance, I'll bring in some geometry. Also, we could be bringing in some landscape in here. If I was bringing in landscape from GIS data and this type of thing, I could bring that in as well. I'll just use my geometry from Revit, and of course we can bring in some point cloud here. So going back to my geometry here, if I look into here and open my Datasmith here, so there's that simple one I did then with the HS2 development 3D view, no tiles on it, so to speak. So I click on open there. Here, when I create the geometry or bring the geometry into Twinmotion, I've got the option here, what they call collapse or not. So what I want to do with the building that I brought in, I actually just want to keep the hierarchy here. I'm going to keep all the hierarchy so that I can still edit doors, windows, floors and walls and things like this. So I keep that, keep the precision of UVs, etc. Light settings, I don't actually have any lights in here, but very often what I find it useful, if you've got any lighting in your Revit model, I would just set intensity values to Twinmotion's default here. So sometimes the IES data looks a little bit strange sometimes, so I'll just bring it into the Twinmotion default. So I'm just going to click straightforward import there. I'm not sure there, so I click on OK here. So here's my basically my model coming straight into Twinmotion. Here it is, and you can see some of the original stuff here is showing. So for example, over on the right hand side now, we can see what we have here in our scene, and I've got the starting base here. There's those three objects there that are basically I don't need, so I can right click on those and then just delete those out of the way, or indeed I can just select them like that and actually press delete, just takes those out. So here in essence I've got the principal model that I'm going to use in my little project here. If I zoom out now, you can see here that this surface here, this is my starting plane within my Twinmotion, is set to 0. So I could actually move him down a bit. Whoops. That's it, just move him down a bit like that. And you can see now that I've got this geometry showing up here that I was talking about earlier on. So there's my surface there, topo surface, another topo surface, another topo surface in here. So before I actually look at creating anything there, I'm going to bring in those tiles, for example. Now, if I look at my import here now, I just brought in the Datasmith file. I can still bring in another file in here, and I click on open here. And in my Revit, I exported my Revit view of the tiles just as a FBX. So I'm just bringing it in as an FBX file. So if I click on open here, the reason why I separated that is that I actually just want this not to keep the hierarchy on this particular part of my building. because I don't want Twinmotion to list every tile. So I'm just going to bring that in here and collapse all here. I'll bring that into here as well. So pretty straightforward there. Now, if I import this, you can see here, you know, little relatively a glitch, if I might be honest, is that when I brought this in, it's just basically been rotated 90 degrees. If I hover over my rotation parameter here and I change that, redefine that. Oops, I've just set the wrong item there, like this. I just put my tiles in there. So the tiles are just a completely simple object. So it just says roof tiles here, where I can hide and put them in like that. So I use that as just a simple little project there. The main area for us is, I can see that I've got two buildings here that I just got as a mass in, to be honest. So if we liked, I can just come into my materials here and think about changing some of the materials in here. Maybe, you know, I can use any material, like I said, even if I had a translucent material like this, excuse me, to apply. Maybe this waxy material, it doesn't matter. I mean, the point is I'm just applying a material. Now, if I drag this material over onto, say, my massing like that, it will then place that material on all of them. One of the questions that have come up quite a lot is with people saying, when I drag a material on, it actually puts this material on everything. And that's because it's defaulting up here. There's a little feature up here that it replaces the material here. But if we want it to apply to a given element or a given object, I could select that like that. So for example, on this one, I could have that is that one, that material on that object and that material on this object. So really speaking, we've got some really nice little features there like that. One of the aspects I quite like with Revit is that Revit has a concept of planting. So we do actually have these type of trees that have come in. This planting here is directly from my Revit model. So I've got, hold down my shift here, select all of those. I've actually got some trees from Revit. Now, once again, if you're working with Revit, of course, and you're scheduling stuff, then that's fine. But very often when I move into my visualization now, I don't necessarily need that component as that billboard tree. I'd like to have a little bit of a nicer tree in here. So with those trees selected, if I right click on those, I can just replace the object. I can click on replace object. So if I come over to my vegetation here on my materials, you can see that I can drag into, on the right hand side here, I can drag in the trees that I want. So for example, here I've only got 5 trees and I actually know that they're 5 beech trees. And so I could just come into here and find my beech tree here like this. If I look at it here, I've got a beech tree. Now, there's a lot of trees available through Twinmotion, sometimes many trees, American trees, but there's a few European trees as well. So I'm using this European beech, and I can just drag that, pop that into there. Now, if you did have many trees, you could indeed create many trees in here, drag many trees into there, and then start the replacement there. So even if I've only got 5 here, but even if I had 200 trees, we could use that. So I can replace with all of those trees like that. So this is essentially, I'm just changing the trees there, of course. But if I come over to my grounds here now, you can see that I've got, as I said, I've got this concept here, which is a topo surface. Now what I would tend to do with this topo surface, I could actually put that topo surface, I could actually move it to a new container, because I want to turn this on, turn it off, so that it's showing in my phasing as what we will do in a second. So if I move that to a new container, and I just call that the existing topo or something like this, I've got existing topo in there. So I've got a container here which has got just my existing topo, and of course I can then hide that if I want. So if I look at these other topo here, these actually these three here, these three are actually topo that is the new regrade for the HS2 going by. So I'm going to right click on here and I'm going to create or move those to a new container. So maybe this is the new regrade topo, something like that. So essentially I've got those in there like that. What I would tend to do with this, because I want to change some of this, I'm going to select that file, that folder, and I'm just going to drag it all the way up here so that it's a little bit closer to the top of my work here, because I'm going to turn things on, turn things off. So here we've got my project. Now, in order for us to create a infrastructure change in my project here, I would actually use a feature in here called phasing. So for example, if I come over to my media here, we've got a concept here. When we work with Twinmotion, we can have a media area here called media. In other words, I can create some images. So for example, if I want to just zoom into here, for example, I know I haven't put a lot of geometry into it at the moment, but it doesn't stop me just clicking on image here. So click image, there I've got an image straight away. Later on, we can just export this out, save the image, etc. I'll just come out of that mode there for a moment and jump over to the one that I'm rather looking at here. So I've got a concept called phasing group here. And what does that mean? That basically means that I can now think about the change over time that my project has. And for that, if we look at my project here, you can see that, of course, what I would like to do is have an animation that will change that concept. And so if I look at my phasing here, there's my image I've just done, there's video there, presentations are here. If I look at this fella here for the phasing, and then I click on a new phasing group here, we can see that we've got a phasing group. Now what this is sort of like a 3D Gantt chart really, in that I've got phases going on here. So this time I've got, over a couple of months, this is the phase. I can make that shorter and stuff like that. So basically I can leave that as the starting phase. So if I have that selected in here like this, I could indeed turn off my regrade. Sorry, so that one there is back. So in its initial state, the regrade is not there. If I had created another phase after it, select there, then my existing phase would be off, but my regrade phase is on. So what we're saying here is that I'm moving from a geometry that is phased. So in other words, I'm saying this is available now, this is not available now, and so on and so on. So what I've done here, that concept is working rather nice. And like I said, I've just moved that out. So what I'll do here, I'm going to open a recent one and look at my development as I've completed it here. So I'll click on here, and in typical Blue Peter style is show one I've done earlier. So the idea is I created that process all the way through here. So here I've got my project, essentially my project here. If I come to my media here, phasing here, click on this phasing here now. If I just zoom out here, you can see now that my phase here, I can move along to my phasing. You can see I've got the building now working here, and then the final project is here. So I've done this very briefly in that when we create the geometry, I've got a phasing group moving through here, which is pretty good. So the idea of phasing, I think it's quite nice that I can use that in my work here. So like I said, to emphasize the progression of the site, I would use phasing. If I move over to my videos here, I create a video, and that essentially means I'm start a video, I then move my position, create a new pose, and away we go. So on this one, I can move, I'm moving through my project, through down the garden, looking up here, and you can see that as we move up here, you can see that the project actually starts to change. There's the project build, there's the geometry in there. And then as I move down here, we can see that our HS2 is there. So this is just really just a little idea of the process. So in other words, what I'm really saying there is that the phasing is really useful. So what I'll do here also, if I look at this other one here, this one I looked at, whoops. So this one with my trees here. One of the other aspects of this particular project, which is actually real, I mean, my daughter lives at a village, and they actually had a bit of a parish meeting about this, which was rather nice. So if I come to my media here, you can see I've created a lot of images in here. So not only have I got the images from the back garden looking at this new project here, I've got some images here. I've also got another image here in the middle of the winter. The reason why I did this view was that when the trees are growing, and one of the ideas was that those trees being placed there would actually create some greening. And I said, well, what about the winter? What's going to happen there? So these are the trees that were put there, popular trees there. So this was the idea that this is the view I created at the end. Now this is the view that the trees have grown over 5 years, and this is the view where they've just been planted. So the idea was that we're trying to get over that that the project was going to evolve over 5 years. So if I come over to my videos here now, you can see that on my videos here, you can see that I've actually did a little video just to show the trees growing over that period of time, and essentially what would it look like. So in other words, this is an animation, which is what they call pose to pose, in that as I move along into here, I can look at the properties here through what we call ambience here, and I could not only change the weather, the rain, if we want, but this is where I would change the seasons. Also, we could change the location settings here, and under the details here, we've got the visual details in here as well, which is rather nice. So under here, this is where I've got my vegetation growth here. So I can change the vegetation growth there. What's nice about the visualization of the growth of the trees in Twinmotion, it is actually defining a growth of a tree, not necessarily a smaller version of the same tree. So I think that's some useful little ideas there. So we can animate the trees, we can animate the time of year, all of this. And not only that, we can actually come in and place some views in here. I can click on a image here, move around where I want to be, anything like this. If I like it, if I wanted this view here, and I could just add a view in there, and then I've got my new image there. And then later we can output those images and it will be rendered very, very quickly. Okay. So from an infrastructure point of view, I think Twinmotion is really useful there. What I'd like to do is look at another little aspect of using Twinmotion that I find quite useful. So I'm going to just close out that one. If I have a new scene here, here's my Twinmotion, again, new scene. Very simple here. And there's my properties over there. Just leave that there for a moment. So once again, perhaps I, just take out these few components here, delete that. So one of the other aspects I quite like with Twinmotion is that if I come over to the one here called populate, for example, if I'm working in London and I've got a house in London, townhouse in London, I can actually use this concept called populate. And if I come to urban here, I can see then that I can change my location and pick a location here. So what I've done here, basically, if I pick on something like London here, so London, forgive me choosing London, but London is here, so I can use London. So now I've got quite a nice area of London. Now, what I would do here is basically move my view to wherever I want to be. So for example, whatever, I mean, I'm going into London later today, so wherever I want to be. So if I put, let's say I'm just coming to here, and then I can download and place that geometry into here. So what I like about this is that, really speaking, we are utilizing this concept here in placing this in here now. So if I look at my view here, you can see now that we've got some nice view of this area of London. Really useful there. So for example, here I've got quite a nice view of London here. But also what we can do in this particular aspect, if I wanted to here, we can once again import here. I could import another house. So for example, another Revit or Datasmith file. So if I clicked on open here, I could bring my townhouse in here. So what I've done actually with this one is, if I come file, open again, if I do my demo, my townhouse here, the idea is that I've got this placed in the correct position here. So okay, there, I'll just open there. So I've got this property in my building. So this particular house is my Revit, is in Revit. So here it is. I brought that in here. Now that particular model, I do actually have that as a Revit model. So I'm just gonna come back here, file, So my townhouse here. So what I did exactly the same thing. So my Revit, I'm working with my Revit. I just bring my townhouse into my my world in London there. So let me just, so here it is. Basically, there's the property of my townhouse. So I did exactly the same thing, datasmith and so on there. So that comes into my property here. Now, if we look at the property here, I've got my terrain is here. So if I selected anything in here, I've actually got the building. If depending on the quality of the 3D, and I think it's a Google Maps interface here, I've actually got each one of the buildings. So 3 Victoria Street is here and so on. So once again, I can use this geometry now to indeed view my final position here, and things like the tree again. I got classically London plane is in the scene here, which is rather nice. One of the aspects I quite like about this is that if I look at this lighting here, I've got the idea that we can adjust the lighting, and then exactly the same thing as I said before, we can actually bring that lighting into the views, into the animation, into phasing. It's absolutely fine. Another option is here, I can even come in, if I come into here to be in the pedestrian, then I have the pedestrian options of walking around. So like this. So once again, I can enhance as much as I like by using that. But what I do like about this is that I can actually set through my ambience here. Not only can I load in from London, but I can also, I have my details here. I can say exactly where the lighting is. So there's 2 things going on here. There's the physical geometry coming in of my London area, and now from a lighting point of view, I can just tell it where I want. I could actually even put in the longitude, latitude here of a particular building as well, as you can see here. And, or if I just change this to London again, I can have London, United Kingdom, and then the lighting will be arranged to suit there as well. So that, I think that's really, really good as a concept within Twinmotion. I do like that. So we've got those properties there. Now, once again, we can, whoops, let me just come into make that back to being a drone, and then I can just come and zoom out in here. And once again, as I can zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, one of the aspects is that with the buildings, so adjacent buildings, with this building, if I want to change the height and stuff of this type of building, I can. So in essence, this building, if I know that this building is adjacent to the project I'm working on, very often you might find that the model that you downloaded into your space is not as accurate as you'd really like it to be, especially if you're doing some shadows. So with the adjacent building here, I can adjust its height here so that when I do any lighting analysis with shadows, I can actually get a bit better idea of how the buildings around me are impacting the buildings on here. So there we go. We got some quite nice concepts in there in that Twinmotion as well. One of the other or last aspects I just wanted to briefly look at is that if I come to a file here, and then if I look at the open file here, forgive me here, I just come to my, it's just another little project I was working on here. Just a second now. Forgive me here, I lost it for a second there. So just a second. So sorry, I'm not quite sure about that one. But what I did is, I find that. But what I did is created a project in Twinmotion, and I recently was showing it to some clients that I can actually send it to the cloud and give it to them and view on the cloud. So if I look at, let's just come back to a view here that I can actually have here. So this one. So just looking at this view here, I've created a project and I've uploaded a presentation and I uploaded it to the cloud. And the idea of this particular little process was to have this idea on Twinmotion, but I sent it to a cloud storage here so that we can view this little rebar sequence. So it was an idea that I had, and I was speaking with some colleagues and they said, look, on site, if we've got a rebar or something like that, other than the normal visualization walkthroughs like interior design and pretty pictures, so to speak, that I had another option here. And what I did, we created a little project, and it was this little presentation. Now this is accessing the cloud at the moment, so just give it a couple of seconds there. Just give that a couple of, oops, wrong one there. Let me just give that, let that find it there. So really then, so here we have this is actually on the cloud. So I would create my presentation and I can just upload this to the cloud. And here we have an opportunity here. So in order for you to view this, or your clients or contractors to view this, you don't need Twinmotion. I actually tried this. I've spoken to colleagues, see if it works, and it's been fine. I've even uploaded it onto my tablet. And of course, if you're out on site, it would work, provided, of course, you've got relatively good internet access. So here I created phasing, just like I created the other phasing that I spoke about. So for example, I've got this site here, simple site, but I wanted to have a phasing study to show how the steel reinforcing bar was going to be fitted and how it reacts to the process. So for example, I've got steel reinforcing there. You're creating the pads first, and then I move on up. You can see that it would then do the plinth, and then it was going to do the ground beam there, you see, and then there's the connectivity between the two. And this is what I was explaining now, that the next part is that I would, on the site, we're saying, well, that's going to be poured first. The reason why that's poured first before we actually consider columns is because we need to define a kicker plate here or a plinth plate here there for the columns. So that would be done first, and then after that, the columns would be reinforcing would be placed in there, even to the extent that we could zoom in and you can see that in this particular project, I would need my reinforcing to at least have a 600mm scarf joint on the project there. And so this type of thing I find very useful indeed. So here we go. We've got some quite nice concepts in here now. So I'll close that up here. So there we go. We've got a few little ideas on Twinmotion. Like I said, one of the main areas I quite like, of course, is that we do have the opportunity. If I come back to, say, the one with the trees there, let me just open the trees there. Like I said, this one here is quite nice. That this is a view from the backyard or the back garden. I can create some changes in here in this as well. So like I said, you know, the usual suspects here. What's it going to look like if it's in the middle of winter? You know, is the train going to impact it and stuff like that? What if it's raining? You know, that type of thing as well. So we can create that and create the animations and the stills for that. So for example, if I come to my media again here, I could then of course add another image here. So here's my image here like this. If we're ready with that, then with our images, I can click on export here. So once I click on export, I can either export some images to a full render, or indeed I can export the video here that I've made to a MP4 video or something like this. So if I click on my images here, let's say I've got that last image there from the rain, I could pop that on there like this, and that would select that to render. Here it is, PNG, and I can pop the details here, the size and stuff on here. I could export this to the cloud, which is what I was talking about a moment ago for that reinforcing steel. So that I could export that presentation up there. So if I just have, at the moment, I've just got a simple image that I'm exporting. If I start that export here and just give it a place to put it. So if I just put it in my webinar folder, I select that, estimating time left, computing that, and then it's very quick. So I've now got a render done, very quick rendered. Obviously, the bigger it is, the more the render's going to be. So if I just come back into my here, I've actually got image 6 here. So there's image 6 just coming in here. So once again, I've just done an image of the rainy day in the back garden there.